Okay, so we're going to be doing our podcast now. We're doing it over Heart of Darkness, obviously. So, we're going to start with our first question now. Who's going first?
I can go first.
Okay.
Okay. So, throughout the book, there's a lot of relations calling people savages. So, who do you think is the real savages, the Europeans or the Africans?
That's a good question. Uh, at first, you would think the actual savages of the area, but then whenever you actually read the story, you notice that the Europeans kind of throw death out there as if it is nothing. They look at it and it just doesn't really matter to them. And Marlowe even says at one point he can see where they're coming from. It's like a prehistoric version of himself, and he can kind of feel it in himself.
Yeah.
Okay, a question I had was, why was Marlowe so obsessed with the darkness? Like, he started as a child with the map, being obsessed with the darkness. I just don't get that.
I don't think it was the darkness per se. I think it was the unknown, Like that sense of adventure
Yeah.
that he was. I don't know if obsessed would be the right word, but he was drawn to. Like it's just something that interested him.
Hmm.
Do you mind if I go back to the previous question? I was having
Yeah,
trouble.
go ahead.
So, in my opinion, savagery, it's what's the word? Everyone has their own opinion on savagery. No one's like truly a savage. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Like, like you can't just. I can't explain it. I had it in my head like a second ago, but you, no one's truly. It's all subjective. There we go.
Mm.
It's everyone has their own view on what a savage is. Like you can there can be just some guy with his pants falling off, falling down in the street, and you'd be like, oh, sort of thing. No one's truly like a savage unless it's subjective.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that, because, it's kind of like how people see, black and white. Not everything's black and white. There's always, a gray in between.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Everything's not as simple. Like they say savage, but in comparative, sure they don't have the average modern lifestyle that the Europeans did at the time, but at the same time, it was the Europeans that went into their land and made them the slaves and made them worthless. Which
Hmm.
I'd say is more savage than just not having electricity or a boat or like
Yeah, yeah.
so. It's definitely different ways of viewing it. Of course, the Europeans are going to say, "Oh yeah, we're fine. We're not savages," because they want to be seen in that.
Maybe they just used it as kind of like an overused term, like how everyone says right? Maybe they're just like, oh, savage. They overuse the term, but they don't really
They didn't have a
they
firm definition of it.
yeah they or
Hmm.
they undermines the savages,
Yeah,
Yeah.
by using it so
yeah.
much. Yeah, I'm sorry about
It's
the whole backtrack. I
No, you're
couldn't.
good.
No,
I
you're
wanted to get my
completely
idea.
fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, we could just go back and forth on our ideas.
yeah, yeah.
Another thing, if Kurtz was on the verge of death, all these delays that kept happening, they were keeping him from seeing Kurtz. I thought to myself, what if his boat's sinking and he had to repair for 3 months? What if the manager did that in order for him to never meet Kurtz?
I was under the impression that it was Kurtz who sunk the ship.
Oh, I could kind of see that, yeah, because Kurtz was trying to keep them from getting to him so that way they couldn't take him away.
Yeah, that was my impression of it. Was
It's
that
a
Kurtz was the one that sunk the ship?
it's an interesting point of view. I can't really agree with you. I can't for sure agree with both of you, but it is a good idea to think about,
Yeah.
to dwell on. Um, I'll ask a question.
Okay.
So, one of my questions is that, so you know how this is called the Heart of Darkness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, now, Britain, this isn't the only place that is like that. You got like Britain. Now I know the Congo was under Belgian rule at the time, but most of it was most of Africa was under British control, and so Africa wasn't the only place where this was happening. You got India, you got a lot of Asia. There's a lot of places where sort of similar stuff would be happening. So
Like
I've
exploitation.
yeah, so I feel like the title Heart of Darkness, like it's a good title, but it's not 100% true that Africa isn't exactly, not saying it's good, but the it isn't the it's not the worst place
It's
But
that
that
not
like
the.
kind of goes back to the whole thing about the darkness on the map. Back then, he was referring to the Heart of Darkness as being like the little part of the map with the river that was not filled. He wanted to visit that to see what it was like. And it also refers to at the very beginning of the book when he was talking to the crewmates before he told the story. He was talking about how in his childhood he read up about the Romans going to visit the people in Britain and how they probably saw them as savages,
hmm
which also goes back to the first question. But like, it's like no matter what, you live a certain way as someone else's, so you might see them as a savage, they might see you as a savage. And the Heart of Darkness was necessarily more of just like the unknown, basically. Like how Matthew
Yeah.
said darkness represented the unknown. It's like he wanted to visit what was truly unknown to everyone. Even though in the before he starts the story, he said, "Of course now it's fully explored, but back then it was such a huge thing that piqued my interest."
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question, real quick. The second one, dealing with the topic of savagery again. Do you think that that okay? So like the term savage, right? It's used to denote a certain group of people that is acts a certain way.
Mhm.
But who's to say that we're all savages on the inside, and the only thing keeping us from acting that way is civilization? Like Kurtz, he was, you know,
Yeah.
respected and like a well-known figure, but then he turned into a savage. If he was so civilized, why did he turn?
Yeah, that
Like,
that's true cuz like he was a political figure and no one was really certain of what his job was in the book cuz he painted, he did music, he was a musician, he was a political figure. Everyone that met him admired him. It was like, how did someone so intelligent go so crazy? And I think what ends up happening is Marlowe says that it wasn't that he went insane. It was more of just like his soul started going insane, is what he said. Because he was still perfectly sane in his brain and he was still logical and still intelligent. It was more of that he just felt like his soul was impacted by the Heart of Darkness.
hmm
so then, do you think that no matter how civilized someone might be, that can happen to them?
Yeah, I think that's what Marlowe was basically pulling this story out to say.
Yeah. Okay.
I do agree with the
Another
whole.
thing that I thought, I know that anything that came out of Kurt's mouth usually left with someone admiring him. But like, how did the natives side with him? It would have taken him such a long time for him to communicate with them, and he could have ended up like that Dutch captain at the beginning that Marlowe ends up replacing. Like,
Mm,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
pretty sure it's said in there that when in Kurtz's letter that he was talking about how primitive they were and how the white people were seen as like deities almost.
Deities,
I think
yeah.
that might have been how, like, they worshipped him, and then how would you react? You know, if like your god was like, hey bro, you wanna hang out? Like, I'm pretty sure it wasn't that hard of a part of a thing for him to accomplish.
I guess.
Yeah. And
Do you have another question, Victor?
or no, I was gonna kind of continue.
Go ahead.
And I do think that some of it is not just the whole like deity thing. I think some of it was just that he was just nice to them at some point, you know?
Hmm.
Because you were talking about civilized, so if he was like a civilized person before he came to this place, a true, like I guess, civilized in a way person wouldn't treat the Congolese people like that, you know? And maybe, you know, as time went on, turned into who he was. Eventually, he would turn to, you know, his fate would catch up with him. So I think that the whole deity thing is true. Like, I agree with that.
But it makes me wonder, because, like, for most people, you would think that the deity thing would go to their heads, especially with, like, how they were raised with, like, such ideals and ideas of racism and how they're better than the Congolese people. So you would think, like, maybe it got to his head at some points, and maybe he could have betrayed their trust.
Yeah.
Another thing that, like, bothered me in the book was, like, at the very end, whenever he told the fiance of Kurt's that his last words was her name, how he mourned as if, like, Kurtz was his best friend. Like, I get that he admired Kurtz at the very end, but he only knew Kurtz for such a short period of time. And sure, he was the one that Kurtz trusted the most at that moment, but he was also the only person that Kurtz could trust at that moment. Because he didn't trust the manager, and he didn't trust him, any of the other crewmates.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's weird how throughout the whole book he tries to be a moral character and not lie and stuff, and then at the very end he lies.
Hmm.
And he says, "Oh, his last words were, your name, reality, dog."
And it also goes with his character too, because during the book you also read that he says something like, "I'm not one for lying because it makes me feel like terrible. It's not that I think that I'm better than anyone else. It's just that lying leaves a bad taste in my mouth." And then at the very end, whenever he lies to her, he's expecting the heavens to go down on him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, you know, I don't like, you know, I try not to do that, but sometimes you just gotta do it. Like, I was to a podcast the other day, and then, you know, they kind of like pulled up the coronavirus because, you know, it's such a big deal, right?
Hmm.
And one of the people, when they were saying that, you know, they were discussing, is it right to, you know, like, tell your kids everything? Or is it okay because of the situation to protect them, to lie to them? Or not necessarily like full on
Yeah, I
lie to
get
them,
it.
but like you kind of hide through.
Yeah, like a white
So
lie.
yeah, yeah. Like I think he was lying, but not to, you know, not to be a bad person. He was doing it to protect Kurtz's wife,
Ex-fiance, yeah.
or ex. Yeah, I got confused for a second. But yeah,
And another thing, like, if you think about it, his last words were actually the horror, the horror. I always wondered where that came from because it was so popular in a bunch of media and stuff like that. And now I know where it comes from. But like, what exactly causes you to live out your life like that, and then suddenly you realize all your dreams and ambitions are gone once you're dying?
hmm.
Because, like, you would think that he was already thinking about that before. Because he'd been sick for a long time.
He probably just got caught up in it, you know. Like he says, like if they try and take him, the savages will, or the the natives will lash out. So it's probably one of those things where he was just so ingrained in that moment where it didn't really matter to him.
the high
Once,
wore
a
off.
little bit of civilization, came
Hmm.
back to him, he's like, oh, well, I've wasted life doing the jump, I'm done.
Yeah. Finally, I guess he finally realized what he's been doing, and what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He finally realized what had been happening.
He finally, I guess, woke up in a way.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, this book is filled with symbolism, like, the whole heart of darkness.
Hmm.
But what do you think is the most important symbol in the book?
I think I would originally start with darkness, but I think it's actually the ivory
I do agree with that.
because it's
I
like
was gonna say that.
it affects the greed of all the people. The reason why they went there was for the ivory so they could get more money. That's the reason why Kurtz was there. Kurtz was obsessed with the ivory. I think ivory really represents human greed, obsession, and basically avarice as a whole.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but you could also say that comes from the dark place, and that's why it's the heart of darkness, because it's the heart of that trade.
Yeah. And another symbol that is popularly talked about with this book is imperialism. But Marlowe doesn't really cover that too much, because Marlowe wasn't too into it. It was more of just like the people around him.
It could be the whole politics side of it too, why he doesn't talk about it, because we don't really know when this book takes place. I know it's not recent, but
Yeah,
it could be maybe at the time the British finally abolished slavery, but the Belgians they didn't. So maybe he's kind of uncomfortable talking about that whole situation because his
Maybe.
country it's not okay, but
yeah.
another one, it's kind of like ooh, I don't know about that.
I mean, he did seem uncomfortable at the very beginning when he saw them. Because he said, I'm gonna wait
And
for all of these black people to continue tracking up the mountain, and then I'm gonna track after they're already gone.
maybe it was
Yeah,
just he
that
was
whole first
raised.
scene where they introduce that is very, very vivid.
Maybe he was just maybe he was raised with the abolition thing in mind, where
Maybe.
he was born after, and then he goes on this adventure, and it's just all of a sudden from abolition to like full on slavery.
Yeah. One more question. I had my last one. Was did the Europeans, the white men, did they have the authority or the obligation morally to civilize the people that they thought were not civilized? Like what gives them that, we're gonna go here, we're gonna civilize? Because that was another one of their supposed goals, aside from the ivory, was we're gonna go civilize all these.
I think
I
that just
think,
goes hand in hand with imperialism, because like with imperialism, it was like God, glory, and gold, the three G's.
yeah, man, that's exactly. It goes back so far into their, you know, DNA that the Europeans are the superior ones. That back in the exploration of the New World, they that was like one of the three Gs. Like
Yeah, but like what gives them the right, like it's happened for a long time. What made them think, oh, that we're civilized and we have to civilize them, Like do you think it was it was all a farce, or what do you think gave them that motive? Because they did this for a long time, what kept them doing it?
I think originally it started with their greed for what they knew came from there, how expensive the stuff was, and then they met the natives there and decided that those natives were savages. I think that's where it all starts.
and I'm not siding with them, but were they wrong to try to civilize them? Like I understand slavery is bad, but the way it sounds like civilizing people, it sounds like you're just trying to help them, or not help them, but trying to, I guess, in a way
Bring them
improve.
to the current times almost.
Yeah, like help. Like I
Yeah.
know what they were doing was wrong, but yeah, help them get to. a better state than where they were, because like back then it was pretty bad. Like now it's still bad, but back then it was pretty bad with the situation they were in, especially with all of the.
Well, personally, like that reminds me of what was the book that we read for the summer, where the
Brave New
Baptist
World.
family, yeah, no, the Baptist family moved to the Congo.
The Poisonwood Violet.
Yeah, because they went there just to change their views, and then they had to adapt to what was going on there. And whenever they finally went back to civilization, they forgot what it was like to be like that, and they forgot what that luxury was like, and they weren't comfortable. So I guess it's more of just like you're trying to force your own ideals and ideas on some other group of people that have never seen anything like that before.
Yeah, they had good intentions, but it wasn't carried out in the right.
Mhm.
But is that the right thing to do, though? You know, like, is it right just to go impose your will on others because you think they're better off with it? You know, like these people have
I don't
survived
know.
for, you know, who
It's.
knows how long
I think
by
it's
themselves.
Again, I don't think it's truly black and white. You could say that you're with them, that was the right thing to do, or you could say it was the wrong thing to do. I think it's more of like a gray area
Yeah.
where morally it makes sense morally why they would try to help them. But if you look at it the way they executed it, it is completely immoral.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was my third question. So,
Okay.
if you guys have any more,
I've went through all my questions. Victor, do you have any?
I have another one, but I can't think of it. I forgot. I didn't write it down.
Okay.
I have it, but
I got one. What did you guys think of the Russian dude that was
the
thought
crazy
of as
dude.
a Harlequin?
I don't know. I mean, he was interesting. He was kind of like a minor character, I'd say, 'cause he was there and then he was gone. You know.
Yeah, he did kind of leave immediately, but that's because they were plotting and conspiring against him to like hang him.
hmm
I think like he is what the main character Marlowe needed in order to like truly admire Kurtz.
yeah,
Cause like obviously he probably would have admired him, but not as much as he does at the end because he saw this Russian dude quit literally everything just to follow Kurtz.
hmm
Yeah.
I think it was a nice change of pace from the other characters that we've been seeing,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
That reminds
It's
me
kind of like.
the helmsman that died, like how Marlowe was affected by that, because like throughout the story they handle death as if it doesn't matter and it's not something important, but Marlowe touched up on the helmsman, like he genuinely built a bond and a connection with the dude.
hmm
I think that's what separated him from everyone else. Was everyone else saw death as just, oh, you know, just whatever, and then this guy's like, no, guys, like it's serious. You know, it's something we should think about.
Hmm.
hmm Um, I guess like just a final, really basic question would be, what do you guys think of the book?
Personally, I thought it was okay. I can kind of see why it's a classic, but personally, I don't think I would have just normally just sat down and read it for the fun of reading it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good book. There's not too much with it where you could say, oh my god, this book's terrible. Why? You know, like, it has a good structure, has a good story, good morals. It follows a good path and a storyline. But yeah, I mean, maybe just in today's age, most people, you know, were in different types of stories from different types of ages. Like, you wouldn't go back and read, you know, a story from the Vikings age, just as, you know, a modern day person probably wouldn't go back and read something from like um I don't know 1700s, you know, like the Scarlet Letter. Like, you know, it's one of those things where,
Hmm.
you know, over time this will be one of those books where, yeah, it'll be recognized and it'll be required reading, but I don't think people will be as into. But it definitely was a good book. It was a good story. I did like it. It was very vivid in multiple parts
Yeah.
in its
I
description.
thought. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I thought it was interesting. Like Jeremiah said, I wouldn't just like sit on my couch and just pull it out and read it just for leisure. It was a good read. It did what it was supposed to, and what it was supposed to do was, show us some of these inner workings of what was really going on at the time, and exposing people who wanted to read it to that sort of lesson, I guess.
Hmm.
That sort of moral, that world,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that story, of like this is what happened. Maybe not
Basic.
word for word, but
Yeah.
this is an anecdote almost of what
Yeah.
life was like for a good few decades.
It does what it does, and it does what it does.
This book was kind of like an antithesis to A Brave New World.
Ooh.
Yeah, but we're gonna go back to that with our next book, 1984.
But you guys get to wrap it.
Okay, that was the end of our podcast. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.